I am Elsie Allen, a 29-year-old sergeant in the United States Army. I used to think the most dangerous battlefield was in the mountains of Afghanistan, but I was wrong. The deadliest enemy doesn't hide in a cave. They sit right at the head of my Thanksgiving dinner table. When my parents announced they were handing over the family home to me in front of 18 relatives, everyone applauded their generosity. But my soldier's intuition saved my life. Beneath the coat of fresh paint, which reeked of chemicals, were patches of toxic black mold. And the paper they forced me to sign wasn't a deed. It was a debt sentence of $154,000, disguised so they could buy a luxury RV. They planned to use me as a financial shield, sacrificing my military career for their retirement vacations. They thought I was just a dutiful daughter who would sign without reading. They didn't know I had gathered enough evidence to send them to a court-martial. If you've ever been treated like a walking ATM by your own family, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is for you. The drive back to Rockford felt like traveling through a time loop. I steered my rental sedan down the familiar suburban streets, the gray November sky hanging low over the neighborhood. It was the kind of picture-perfect American suburb you see in pharmaceuticals commercials. Every lawn was manicured to within an inch of its life, brown autumn leaves raked into precise piles, and American flags snapping in the biting Illinois wind from almost every porch. My stomach churned, a mix of hunger and a specific type of anxiety that only family can induce. I had been gone for 18 months. 18 months of sand, MREs, and sleeping with one eye open. All I wanted was the smell of my mother's pumpkin pie, a glass of decent bourbon, and a hug that felt real. I wanted to be Elsie the daughter, not Sergeant Allen the asset. I wanted to believe that, just this once, the homecoming would be different. I parked the car in the driveway, noting that my sister Lila's car took up the prime spot, forcing me to squeeze in near the curb. Typical. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, blonde hair cut to regulation length, eyes tired but sharp, and stepped out. The house looked exactly the same, yet somehow stranger. It was a 2-story colonial, beige siding, black shutters. Standard issue. I walked up the path, my boots crunching on the concrete, and opened the front door. I was hit immediately by a wall of noise and heat. The Detroit Lions game was blaring from the 70-inch TV in the living room, competing with the chatter of aunts and uncles. The air smelled of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, but there was something else underneath it. Something sharp and chemical that tickled the back of my throat. "I'm home," I called out, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. In the kitchen, my mother, Evelyn, was leaning against the granite island. She looked perfect, as always. Her hair was a stiff helmet of hairspray, her apron ironically untouched by a single stain. She didn't turn around. She was scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving rhythmically. "Oh, Elsie, you made it," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Wipe your feet. I just had the carpets cleaned." No hug, no, "Oh my God, you're safe." Just a command about the carpet. I walked into the living room. My father, Randall, was holding court near the fireplace, a glass of red wine in one hand, gesturing wildly with the other. He was wearing a sweater vest that cost more than my monthly combat pay. And that's why I told the contractor, "Listen, pal, I know quality when I see it." Randall boomed, laughing at his own joke. He spotted me and his eyes lit up, not with affection, but with the look of a showman finding his prop. And here she is. The hero returns. He didn't walk over to me. He opened his arms wide, inviting me to come to him, to complete his tableau. "Come here, Sergeant. Tell Uncle Bob about that thing. The thing with the tank." I forced a smile, the kind I learned to wear when dealing with high-ranking officers who didn't know a damn thing about the ground reality. "It wasn't a tank, Dad. It was a Humvee." "Good to see you." I did the rounds, shaking hands, accepting pat-on-the-back platitudes from relatives who hadn't sent a single letter while I was deployed. I felt like a ghost haunting my own welcome party. I was physically present, but Elsie, the person, was invisible. They only saw the uniform, the status, the bragging rights I provided for the Cooper family name. An hour later, the atmosphere shifted. It was showtime. Randall clinked his fork against his wineglass. The sharp ding 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 cut through the noise of the football game and the chatter. The room went silent. "Everyone, attention please," Dad announced, puffing out his chest. He looked around the room, making sure he had every pair of eyes locked on him. "As you know, Thanksgiving is a time for gratitude, and Evelyn and I have been doing a lot of thinking about legacy, about patriotism." He paused for dramatic effect. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. This was the grandiosity phase. I knew it well. "Our daughter, Elsie, has served this country with honor," he continued, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "She sacrificed so much, and we, as her parents, want to ensure she has a foundation for her future. We don't want her to worry about rent or mortgages when she's out there protecting our freedoms." He reached behind him and pulled out a thick manila folder. "So, today, in front of this family, Evelyn and I have decided to gift Elsie the family home." The room erupted. My aunts gasped. Uncle Bob whistled. Applause broke out, loud and enthusiastic. My father soaked it up, bowing his head slightly like a humble king. But I froze. The blood drained from my face. Gift the house? My parents were only 62 and 60. They weren't moving into a nursing home. This was their primary asset. It didn't make sense. I looked over at my mother. She was standing by the kitchen doorway, watching the scene. She wasn't crying tears of joy. She was smiling. But it wasn't a warm, motherly smile. It was tight, sharp, and triumphant. It was the smile of a predator who had just sprung a trap. The applause died down, and the pressure in the room skyrocketed. Dad walked over and handed me the folder. It felt heavy. "All you have to do is sign the transfer papers, honey," Mom chimed in, her voice sweet as molasses but with a hard edge underneath. "We want to get the legalities out of the way before we cut the turkey. A fresh start for a fresh year." She guided me toward the kitchen island. The surface was dusted with flour from the rolls, but she cleared a space and slapped a pen down next to the paperwork. "Sign it, Private," she joked, winking at the relatives. Everyone laughed. Oh, look at Evelyn, always so witty. I looked down at the papers. The top page was a standard quitclaim deed. But underneath, the stack was thick. Too thick for a simple transfer. And then, I smelled it again. Stronger this time. Standing right next to the kitchen wall, the scent of roasting turkey vanished, replaced entirely by the acrid, chemical stench of fresh latex paint. I looked at the wall behind the fridge. It was a slightly different shade of beige than the rest of the kitchen. Why paint the kitchen right before giving the house away? My military training kicked in. Situational awareness. Something was wrong. The timing. The public announcement to make it impossible for me to refuse without looking like an ungrateful brat. The urgency to sign before eating. The smell. General Mattis had a rule we lived by. Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everybody you meet. In the civilian world, it meant smile, nod, but trust no one until you've verified the intel. "Come on, Elsie, the food is getting cold," Dad said, his voice dropping an octave. The jovial mask slipped for a split second, revealing impatience. "Don't keep the family waiting." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of warning. If I signed this, I was locking myself into something I didn't understand. I looked at my mother's eyes. They were cold, hard flint. She was daring me to cause a scene. She knew I hated conflict. She knew I was the good soldier. But a good soldier doesn't walk into an ambush with her eyes closed. I picked up the folder. My hands were shaking slightly, so I gripped the cardboard tight to hide it. I needed to get out of this kitchen. I needed to get out of the kill zone of their social pressure. I left my reading glasses in my bag upstairs, I lied. My voice sounded surprisingly steady. "I just want to read it over quickly. You know the Army, Dad." Attention to detail. "I'll be right back." The silence in the kitchen stretched for a second too long. Mom's smile faltered. A flash of irritation crossed her face. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Elsie, it's just standard paperwork." "Don't be so dramatic," Mom snapped, her voice low enough that the relatives in the living room couldn't hear. "It'll only take a minute, Mom. I said, stepping back, putting distance between myself and the pen. I can't read the fine print without them. Before they could protest further, I turned and walked toward the stairs. I felt their eyes boring into my back, two laser sights tracking my retreat. I didn't run, but I walked fast. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, the sounds of the football game faded, replaced by the thudding of my own pulse in my ears. I clutched the folder to my chest like it was a bomb that was ticking down. I reached the landing and ducked into my old bedroom, closing the door behind me. I leaned against the wood, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I pulled into the driveway. I wasn't safe yet, but I had the package. Now, I just had to find out what was inside. The door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the roar of the football game and the performative laughter of my relatives. The sudden silence in my childhood bedroom was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. I hadn't stepped foot in this room for 18 months, yet it felt like I had never left, and not in a comforting way. It felt like walking into a museum exhibit dedicated to a person who didn't matter. The air was stale, smelling faintly of dust and old carpet. My twin bed was pushed against the wall, covered in the same faded floral comforter I'd had since middle school. I walked over to the wall by the window. It was my Hall of Fame, or at least my attempt at one. Taped to the beige drywall were my academic certificates. Honor Roll, National Merit Scholar, perfect attendance. The tape had yellowed and peeled at the edges, leaving the papers hanging crookedly, gathering dust. They looked pathetic. They were achievements I had fought for, late nights studying while my parents watched TV, desperate to prove I was worth noticing. And then I thought about the living room downstairs. In the corner of the living room, occupying the prime real estate next to the fireplace, was a curio cabinet. It was mahogany, glass-fronted, and fitted with interior LED lights that were always kept on. Inside that shrine sat Lila's participation trophies for ballet, her third-place ribbons for gymnastics, and a framed photo of her smiling in a tutu. That cabinet was dusted weekly. The lights made the cheap plastic of her trophies gleam like gold. Here, in my room, my actual academic achievements were curling up and dying on the wall, neglected. The architecture of the house itself told the story. Lila was the star. I was the stagehand. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress springs groaning under my weight. The manila folder, the gift, sat on my lap, heavy and ominous. I ran my hand over the cardboard, and a memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp as a razor blade. It was May of my senior year. Prom season. In high school, prom isn't just a dance. It's a socio-political event. It's the night you're supposed to feel like royalty. I had found a dress at the mall, a simple blue chiffon number. It wasn't designer, it wasn't extravagant, it was $100. I remembered standing in the kitchen, clutching the flyer for the dress, my heart pounding as I asked my mother for the money. "Mom," I had said, "it's just for one night. I've never asked for anything big before." Evelyn hadn't even looked up from her coupon clipping. "Oh, Elsie, honey, you know money is tight right now. The economy is rough. We all have to make sacrifices. Maybe you can borrow something from your cousin Rachel? She's about your size." Rachel was 3 inches shorter and 20 pounds heavier than me. But I didn't argue. I nodded, swallowing the lump of shame in my throat, feeling guilty for even asking. "Okay, Mom, I understand." I understood that we were broke, or so I thought. Exactly 1 week later, I came home from school to find Lila, a sophomore at the time, sitting at this very kitchen island. She was squealing, tearing the plastic wrap off a sleek white box. It was the newest iPhone, the one that had just been released. It cost $600. "Look what Daddy got me," Leela had shrieked, holding up the device. My old one had a scratch on the screen, and Daddy said I couldn't be seen with damaged goods. I looked at my mother. She was smiling, baking cookies, humming a tune. The tight money narrative had vanished into thin air. It wasn't that they didn't have the money. They just didn't have the money for me. That was the night something broke inside me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went to the local McDonald's the next day and applied for a job. For the next 2 months, I worked the drive-through window. I came home every night smelling like stale fryer grease and onions. My skin broke out from the oil in the air. I did my homework during my 15-minute breaks, sitting on a milk crate by the dumpster out back. But I bought that dress. I bought it with my own money, crumpled $5 bills and quarters I'd saved from tips. When I walked downstairs on prom night, wearing the blue dress I'd earned with my own sweat, my father didn't say, "You look beautiful." He didn't say, "I'm proud of your work ethic." He glanced up from the TV and said, "Well, at least you didn't ask me to pay for it." I looked down at my hands now, resting on the folder. They were rougher than they used to be. Calloused from gripping rifles, scarred from training exercises. Those hands had learned to be self-reliant because they had no other choice. That self-reliance was what led me to the Army recruiter's office. I didn't join solely for the flag or for glory. I joined because I did the math. I wanted to go to college. I wanted a degree. But I knew, with absolute certainty, that there was no college fund for Elsie. The bank of mom and dad was close to me, even if it was wide open for Lila's shopping sprees. The GI Bill was my ticket out. It was a transaction, 4 years of my life in exchange for a future that I owned fully and completely. I remembered the day I told them I'd enlisted. It was a Tuesday. We were eating meatloaf. The silence at the table was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I signed the papers today," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I leave for basic training in Fort Jackson in 3 months." I waited for the fear. Mothers are supposed to be scared when their daughters sign up for war, aren't they? I waited for my dad to ask if I was sure, to worry about my safety. Randall chewed his meatloaf slowly, swallowed, and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked me in the eye, his expression completely flat. "Good," he said. "One less mouth to feed." That was it. No hug, no tears, just a calculation. To him, I wasn't a daughter embarking on a dangerous and noble path. I was a line item on his household budget that he could finally cross out. I was an overhead cost that had just been eliminated. The pain of that memory was so sharp it made me gasp in the quiet room. It was a specific kind of heartbreak, the realization that your parents don't love you, they just tolerate your existence until you become useful, or gone. Suddenly, a sound from downstairs shattered my reverie. It was laughter. High-pitched, bubbling, carefree laughter. It was Lila. "Oh my God, Uncle Bob, stop it!" she giggled, her voice carrying through the floorboards. "You're going to make me spill my wine." I could picture her perfectly. She was probably sitting on the plush sofa, the diamond necklace my parents had just given her sparkling under the lights. She was 26 years old, yet she had never held a steady job. She lived at home, drove a car paid for by Dad, and had her credit card bills quietly disappear into Mom's purse. She was the golden child, the sun around which the Cooper family orbit spun. She could do no wrong because nothing was ever expected of her. And me? I was the scapegoat, the workhorse, the one they sent away to war and then welcomed back only when they needed a signature to fund their retirement. If you have ever felt like the spare child while your sibling was the heir, or if you've had to parent yourself because your actual parents were too busy admiring their favorite, hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type, "I am worthy." Because you are, and I need you to know that I see you, even if they don't. The sound of Lila's laughter curdled in my stomach. It wasn't just annoying, it was a reminder of the battlefield I was currently standing on. Downstairs, they were waiting. They were expecting the obedient, desperate for approval Elsie to walk back down those stairs, sign the papers, and thank them for the scraps they threw her way. They thought I was still that teenager working the drive-thru, grateful for permission to exist in their house. But they had forgotten one thing. The Army didn't just pay for my college, it stripped away that desperate little girl and replaced her with a sergeant who knew how to spot an ambush from a mile away. I looked at the folder in my lap again. The laughter downstairs felt like a taunt, a noise that belonged to a world of delusions I no longer lived in. "One less mouth to feed," I whispered to the empty room, repeating my father's words. "Well, Dad, you were right. I'm not a mouth to feed anymore. I'm a threat you didn't see coming." I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the cold air of the room and the colder memories of this house. My fingers hooked under the cover of the manila folder. My heart was still beating fast, but my hands were steady. I flipped the cover open. It was time to see exactly how much my family thought I was worth. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, the mattress sagging under my weight, and placed the manila folder on my knees. The room was silent, save for the muffled thumping of the football game downstairs. My hands were steady, but my stomach was a knot of cold dread. I opened the folder. At first glance, it looked like standard legal boilerplate. A quitclaim deed, clean and crisp, with my parents' names listed as the grantors and Elsie Allen as the grantee. It looked like generosity. It looked like love. But the Army had taught me that the devil is always in the details, or in this case, the fine print. I started flipping through the pages. My eyes scanned the legalese, looking for the catch. And then, I found something that wasn't supposed to be there. It was a mistake. A simple, careless error of a generation that struggles with technology. 2 pages were stuck together, likely by the static electricity of a fresh print job. I peeled them apart. The hidden page wasn't part of the deed. It was a piece of scrap paper that had been in the printer tray, printed on the backside. It was a hard copy of an email from a loan officer at Wells Fargo, dated 3 weeks ago. I brought the paper closer to the lamp, squinting at the text. Subject: Refinance application. Cooper Residence. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, we regret to inform you that your application for a cash-out refinance has been denied. Due to your current debt-to-income ratio and the appraisal value coming in significantly lower than the outstanding mortgage balance, we cannot extend further credit. My breath hitched. They weren't just giving me the house. They were trying to get rid of it because the bank wouldn't touch it. I turned back to the quitclaim deed, reading every single word with the intensity of a bomb disposal technician. And there it was, buried in a paragraph of dense text on page 4. In a font size so small it looked like dust specks. The grantee, Elsie Allen, agrees to assume full liability for the outstanding principal balance of the existing mortgage, totaling $154,000, effective immediately upon signing. I dropped the paper on the bed like it was burning my skin. $154,000. They were underwater on the mortgage. The house was worth less than what they owed. If I signed this, I wouldn't just be a homeowner, I would be immediately buried in debt for a property that the bank had already deemed a bad investment. For a civilian, this is bankruptcy. For a soldier with a top-secret security clearance, it's a death sentence. Unmanageable debt flags you as a security risk. I could lose my clearance. I could be discharged. My parents weren't just trying to steal my money, they were about to torpedo my entire career. But why? Why were they so desperate to unload the house right now? And why the fresh paint, the smell? The chemical stench I had noticed earlier wasn't just strong, it was aggressive. It was trying to hide something. I stood up, shoving the papers back into the folder. I needed to see the rest of the gift. I slipped out of my room and moved silently down the hallway. The stairs creaked, but the cheering from the living room covered my footsteps. The Lions must have scored a touchdown. Good. Distraction was my ally. Instead of going to the kitchen, I turned left toward the basement door. I opened it, and the scent hit me harder. My mother had placed a jumbo-sized vanilla cupcake Yankee candle on the landing, the flame flickering in the draft. It was sickly sweet, cloying, and completely out of place in a stairwell. I descended into the dark. The air down here felt heavy, wet. It clung to my skin. I pulled my phone out and turned on the flashlight app, the beam cutting through the gloom. The basement was finished, drywall, carpet, but it felt wrong. I moved toward the far wall, the one that backed up against the foundation where the ground was highest. The beige paint here looked wet, glossy, fresh. I knelt down, bringing the light close to the baseboard. The paint was lumpy, uneven, like someone had slapped a thick coat over a texture that shouldn't be there. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my Gerber multi-tool. I flicked open the small blade. Sorry about the wall, Dad, I thought, and drove the tip of the knife into the paint. I scraped. The latex peeled back like a rubber skin. What was underneath made me recoil, my hand flying up to cover my nose and mouth. It wasn't drywall, it was black. A slimy, greenish-black substance that looked like a necrotic wound spreading across the gypsum. Stachybotrys chartarum. Toxic, black mold. I had seen this in condemned barracks before. This wasn't just a little mildew from a leaky pipe. This was a full-blown infestation, a biohazard. The fresh paint was a cosmetic mask on a terminal cancer. If I lived down here, if I breathed this air, my lungs would be shredded within a year. Respiratory failure, hemorrhaging, neurological damage. They knew. They had to know. That's why they painted it. They were willing to let me live in a toxic box, willing to let me get sick, just to get their names off the deed. Rage, cold and sharp, began to replace the shock. But the puzzle wasn't complete. Why the urgency? Why did they need to dump the house today? The email said they were denied a cash-out refinance. They needed cash. A lot of it. And they needed it fast. I stood up, careful not to touch the wall again. I needed to check the detached garage. I went back up the stairs, blew out the candle, a petty act of rebellion, and slipped out the side door of the kitchen. The wind outside was biting, cutting through my thin sweater, but the cold air felt clean compared to the poison inside. The detached garage sat at the end of the driveway. It was Dad's domain. Usually locked, but today, in the chaos of the party, the side door was unlatched. I slipped inside. It was dark, smelling of gasoline and sawdust. My flashlight swept across the space. Dad's tools were pushed to the sides, cluttering the workbenches, making room for something massive that took up the entire center bay. It was covered in a heavy gray tarp. I walked over, the gravel crunching softly under my boots. I grabbed the corner of the tarp and heaved it back. The beam of my light reflected off chrome and polished fiberglass. It was an RV. But not just any RV, it was a Winnebago View, brand new. The sticker was still in the window. I circled to the driver's side door. It was unlocked. I climbed onto the step and looked at the passenger seat. A clipboard was sitting there. I picked it up. It was the bill of sale from a dealership in Naperville. Date of purchase, November the 20th. 3 days ago. Total price, $87,000. Down payment, $0. Financing, high-interest short-term loan. I stared at the numbers. The picture finally clicked into focus, sharp and terrifying. They had bought the RV. They had already signed for it, probably banking on the refinance coming through to pay off the first chunk. When the bank said no, they were stuck with an $87,000 toy and a house they couldn't afford. Plan B was me. If I assumed the mortgage, they would be free of the $154,000 debt. Their debt-to-income ratio would drop instantly. They could refinance the RV, get a better rate, and drive off into the sunset to live their retirement dream. And I would be left with the wreckage. I would be left with a house that was structurally rotting from the inside out. I would be left with a mortgage that was higher than the property value. I would be left breathing mold spores until I was coughing up blood. They were trading my life for a Winnebago. I stood there in the dark garage, the cold seeping into my bones, looking at this gleaming monument to their selfishness. Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL commander, has a saying, "Discipline equals freedom." Usually that means discipline and training. But right now, standing in the dark, it meant the discipline to check the facts. The discipline to read the fine print. The discipline not to trust blindly, even when the people asking for trust are the ones who gave you life. If I hadn't had the discipline to check that folder, if I had been the emotional, grateful daughter they wanted, my life would be over. I pulled out my phone. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I was done shaking. I took a photo of the bill of sale. I took a photo of the VIN number on the RV. I walked back to the house, went down to the basement, and took a high-resolution video of the black mold peeling under the fresh paint. I went back to my room and photographed the denied email and the assumption of liability clause in the deed. I had the intel. I had the evidence. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier on a mission, and the enemy was sitting in my living room eating turkey. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and looked at myself in the mirror on the back of my bedroom door. The tired woman from the drive home was gone. The eyes staring back were cold, calculating, and ready for war. Roger that, I whispered to my reflection. Target acquired. I needed backup. I needed a witness. I needed someone who wouldn't be swayed by crocodile tears or guilt trips. I needed Rachel. I tucked the manila folder under my arm, holding it tight against my ribs like a riot shield. The hallway was empty, but the noise from the living room was louder now. The roar of the football game, the clinking of silverware, the performative laughter of a family trying to convince themselves they were happy. I took a breath, centering myself. I had the intel. I had the objective. Now I just needed to execute the mission. I reached the bottom of the stairs, my boots making a heavy thud on the last step. Before I could turn toward the kitchen, a hand shot out from the shadows of the hallway and grabbed my arm. My combat reflexes flared. I almost put the assailant in a wrist lock before I realized who it was. Rachel, I breathed, my muscles relaxing slightly. My cousin Rachel was the black sheep of the Cooper family, a title she wore like a badge of honor. While Lila was all pastel sweaters and pearls, Rachel wore black leather jackets and had a nose ring she flipped up whenever Grandma was looking. She was 28, sharp-tongued, and the only person in this house who didn't make me want to defect to a foreign country. "Get in here," she hissed, her eyes wide and urgent. She dragged me toward the powder room, the small half-bath tucked under the staircase that was reserved for guests. She shoved me inside and locked the door behind us. The room was claustrophobic, wallpapered in a dizzying floral print that looked like it had been vomited up by the 1990s. It smelled aggressively of lavender potpourri and deception. Rachel immediately leaned over the pedestal sink and cranked the faucet handle. Water gushed out, splashing against the porcelain. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Sound cover," she whispered, leaning back against the door to ensure no one could barge in. "The walls in this house are paper thin, and Aunt Evelyn has ears like a bat." She looked at me, her expression stripping away the usual layer of sarcasm she used as armor. She looked genuinely terrified. "Elsie, listen to me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Do not sign those papers. Do not sign anything they put in front of you." I held up the folder slightly. "I already know, Rach. I found—" "No, you don't know everything," she cut me off, shaking her head frantically. "You don't know why." I paused. "I know about the debt. I know about the mold." Rachel let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "Oh, that's just the mechanics of the screw job. I'm talking about the motive, the intent." She took a step closer, lowering her voice even further, forcing me to lean in over the rushing water. 20 minutes ago, I was out on the back patio having a smoke," she said. "The window to the kitchen was cracked open. Lila was in there with your mom. They were on speakerphone with someone, maybe a creditor, maybe the RV dealership. I don't know." My stomach tightened. "What did they say?" "I heard Evelyn say, 'Don't worry about the down payment schedule. The insurance plan is here. We just have to get her signature before she leaves for base.'" I blinked, the words processing slowly. "The insurance plan?" "That's you, Elsie," Rachel said, her eyes burning with anger. "They didn't call you Elsie or my daughter. They called you the insurance plan. Like you're a policy they can cash out." I felt a cold numbness spread through my chest. It was one thing to suspect your parents were selfish. It was another to hear that they had reduced your entire existence to a financial contingency strategy. I wasn't a person to them. I was a failsafe. "And there's more," Rachel continued, not letting me process the pain yet. "You know how Lila has been whining about wanting a new car?" "Yeah," I muttered. "She drives a perfectly good Honda Civic. Or she did." "Not anymore," Rachel said. "Last week, she totaled it." My eyes widened. "She what? Is she okay?" "She's fine. Not a scratch on her," Rachel sneered. "But here's the kicker. She didn't crash because of ice or another driver. She told Evelyn she accidentally drove it into a retaining wall because the brakes felt funny. But I heard her bragging to her friend on the phone earlier. She said the Civic was embarrassing and poor people trash. She wrecked it on purpose, Elsie. She totaled it because she knew Mommy and Daddy would buy her something better if the old one was gone." I stared at her, stunned. I thought about my own car, a 10-year-old sedan I maintained with my own hands, changing the oil and rotating the tires because I respected the machine that got me to work. And Lila? She treated a vehicle like a disposable wrapper. And guess where the money for the new car is coming from? Rachel pointed at the folder in my hand. From the liquidity they get once you take the mortgage off their hands. They promised her a BMW X3, Elsie. A BMW's. The rage that had been simmering in my gut since the basement finally boiled over. It wasn't hot, explosive anger. It was cold. It was the icy, focused clarity of a sniper adjusting for windage. They were going to bury me in debt and poison my lungs so that my sister could drive a luxury SUV to the mall. They are disgusting, I said, my voice flat. They are sociopaths, Rachel corrected. They've been parading that RV photo around to the uncles all afternoon, bragging about their golden years road trip. But they conveniently forgot to mention that you're the fuel for the tank. I looked at my cousin, my only real ally in this gene pool of sharks. You need to see this. I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. I swiped to the video of the basement wall. I showed her the black slime oozing under the beige paint. Then I showed her the photo of the RV bill of sale. Rachel watched the video, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. Oh my God, is that? Stachybotrys, I said. Toxic black mold. They painted over it, Rachel. They were going to let me sleep down there. Rachel looked up at me, horror written all over her face. Elsie, that's attempted murder. Or at least reckless endangerment. If you have that in your lungs, I lose my medical clearance, I finished for her. I get discharged. No benefits, no career, just debt and a respirator. Rachel leaned back against the sink, looking like she was about to be sick. I knew they were bad. I knew they favored Lila. But this is evil. It is, I agreed. And that's why I'm not leaving. Rachel blinked. What? Elsie, we need to leave. We need to get in your car and drive until we hit the state line. No, I said, shaking my head. If I leave now, they'll spin the story. They'll tell the family I'm ungrateful, unstable. They'll gaslight everyone into thinking I abandoned them. I need to kill the narrative before I leave the AO. I looked at the mirror above the sink. The fluorescent light was unflattering, highlighting the exhaustion under my eyes, but it also highlighted the set of my jaw. I adjusted the collar of my shirt, smoothing out a wrinkle. I wasn't the girl who used to cry in this bathroom during Christmas parties because Lila made fun of her haircut. That girl was gone. I'm going back out there, I said. You're crazy, Rachel said, but there was a spark of admiration in her eyes. I need a favor, I said, turning to her. I need you to be my combat camera. You're what? In the field, we have soldiers who document operations. Evidence, I explained. When I go back to that table, things are going to get ugly. I need you to record it. Don't hold the phone up like you're filming a TikTok. Be subtle, pretend you're texting, but get the audio and get their faces when I drop the hammer. Rachel straightened up. She wiped a smudge of mascara from under her eye and took a deep breath. A grin slowly spread across her face, the wicked, rebellious grin of the cousin I adored. You want me to catch them in 4K? She asked. I want you to catch them in the act, I said. Rachel pulled out her phone and checked the battery. 80%. Plenty of juice for a family demolition. She reached out and squeezed my arm, her grip tight and grounding. I've got your six, Sergeant. That phrase, military slang for I've got your back, hit me harder than anything else could have. In a house full of blood relatives, the only person who acted like family was the one who owed me nothing. Thank you, I whispered. I turned off the faucet. The rushing sound of water died instantly, replaced once again by the muffled noise of the party outside. The silence in the tiny bathroom felt charged, heavy with anticipation. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. I checked my eyes. No tears, no hesitation. Just the cold, hard calculation of a soldier about to breach a door. Are you ready? Rachel asked, her thumb hovering over her phone screen. I gripped the manila folder. It wasn't a burden anymore. It was ammunition. Roger that, I said, my voice steady. Hold your position, Rachel. There's about to be fireworks. I unlocked the door and stepped out of the sanctuary of the bathroom, marching straight toward the dining room where the predators were waiting for their prey. They thought they were getting a signature. They were about to get a war. I walked out of the powder room and back into the hallway. The air in the dining room felt different now. Before, it had just been stiflingly warm. Now, it felt pressurized, like the cabin of a plane right before the oxygen masks drop. I glanced over my shoulder. Rachel was trailing a few feet behind, her phone already in her hand. She gave me a subtle nod and veered off toward the corner of the room near the china cabinet, a strategic vantage point that covered the entire table. She leaned against the wall, tapping on her screen, looking for all the world like a bored millennial checking Instagram. But I knew the camera app was open. I stepped into the dining room. The transformation was complete. While I was upstairs finding my glasses, my mother had rearranged the battlefield. The centerpiece, a cornucopia overflowing with plastic gourds and fake autumn leaves, had been pushed aside. In its place, right at my assigned seat, sat the manila folder. Next to it lay my father's Mont Blanc fountain pen, the black resin gleaming under the chandelier. He only brought that pen out for signing car leases or bragging rights. "There she is!" Uncle Bob boomed, waving a turkey leg in the air. "The homeowner returns." A ripple of polite laughter went around the table. 18 faces turned to look at me. Aunts with lipstick-stained teeth, cousins already half asleep from the tryptophan, and my parents sitting at opposite ends of the table like the king and queen of a crumbling empire. I pulled out my chair. The wood scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that momentarily silenced the chatter. I sat down. The smell of the food was overwhelming. The roasted turkey, the buttery mashed potatoes, the sickly sweet scent of the candied yams. It all mixed with the lingering chemical odor of the fresh paint to create a nausea-inducing cocktail. "Elsie, darling," Mom said, her voice cutting through the clatter of silverware. She was seated to my right, too close. She reached out and smoothed the cover of the folder, her manicured nails clicking against the cardstock. "We were just waiting for you. The food is getting cold, but we can't carve the bird until the ink is dry. Tradition, you know, new beginnings." There was no such tradition. She was making it up as she went along to force compliance. "Right," I said, my voice steady. "Wouldn't want to break tradition." I looked around the table. Everyone was watching. They were smiling, nodding, expecting the performance to go as scripted. They saw a generous set of parents giving their soldier daughter a head start in life. They didn't see the trapdoor under my chair. My father stood up then. The room went quiet on cue. Randall Cooper loved an audience, and he loved the sound of his own voice even more. He adjusted his sweater vest, cleared his throat, and held up his wine glass. "Family," he began, his voice trembling with a manufactured emotion that would have put a soap opera actor to shame. "When Evelyn and I bought this house 30 years ago, we didn't just buy wood and brick. We bought a dream." He paused, looking misty-eyed at the ceiling. "We poured our blood, sweat, and tears into these walls," he continued. "We raised 2 beautiful daughters here. This house, it's not just a building, it's a member of the family." I kept my face impassive, but under the table, my fists were clenched so hard my nails were digging into my palms. Blood, sweat, and tears. The only thing they poured into this house was neglect, and, recently, a coat of paint to hide a biohazard. "And now," Dad said, turning his gaze to me. He looked so proud, so benevolent. "Now, we pass that torch. Elsie, seeing you grow into the warrior you are, it humbles me." He wiped a non-existent tear from his eye. Aunt Linda let out a sympathetic aw. "We want you to have a place to come back to," Dad said, his voice thickening. "A place that is yours. We just want you to be safe, to be secure. That's all a parent ever wants." It was a masterclass in guilt tripping. He was weaponizing his love to shackle me to a financial anchor. If I refused now, after this speech, I wouldn't just be saying no to a house, I would be spitting on his sacrifice. I would be the ungrateful daughter breaking her father's heart in front of the entire clan. "Here, here," Uncle Bob shouted, raising his glass. "Sign it, Elsie. someone else called out. Best Christmas present ever. Mom nudged the pen toward me. Go on, honey. Just a few signatures, and then we can celebrate. I picked up the pen. It was heavy, cold metal. I felt the weight of 18 pairs of eyes on my hand. The pressure was physical, a heavy blanket of expectation meant to suffocate my critical thinking. But I didn't uncap it. I just held it, turning it over in my fingers. You know, Mom said, her voice raising slightly, trying to keep the momentum going. Speaking of celebration, Randall and I thought it was important to be fair. She reached under the table. My radar pinged. Fair? That word didn't exist in the Cooper vocabulary unless it was being used to manipulate the narrative. Since Elsie is receiving such a significant gift, Mom announced, smiling at the room, we didn't want Lila to feel left out. We know how hard Lila has been working on her personal growth this year. Lila, who was sitting across from me, sat up straighter. She put on a mask of wide-eyed surprise that was about as convincing as a $3 bill. Mom, you didn't have to, Lila squeaked. Nonsense, Dad boomed. We treat our girls equally. Mom placed a box on the table in front of Lila. It wasn't a wrapped gift box. It was a jewelry box, covered in rich, navy blue velvet. It was the kind of box that commanded respect. The room went silent again, but this time it was a silence born of envy and awe. Leela opened the box slowly. A collective gasp went around the table. Even I felt a jolt of shock. Nestled on the white satin cushion was a diamond tennis necklace. It wasn't cubic zirconia. It wasn't crystal. Even from across the table, under the dining room chandelier, the stones fired with that unmistakable cold brilliance of real diamonds. I did a quick mental calculation. Based on the carat weight and clarity, that was easily $10,000, maybe 12. Oh my God, Lila whispered, lifting the necklace out. It draped over her fingers like liquid starlight. Daddy. Mommy. I don't know what to say. You deserve it, princess, Dad said, beaming, for always being our ray of sunshine. Lila fastened the necklace around her neck. It sat right at her throat, glittering aggressively. She looked at her reflection in the back of a spoon, then turned her gaze to me. And there it was. The look. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't joy. It was victory. It's beautiful, Lila said, touching the diamonds. Then she smiled at me, a sweet, sickly smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, Elsie. I blinked. Excuse me? Well, Lila said, her voice light and airy, meant to be heard by everyone. I know Mom and Dad couldn't have afforded to do this for me if they were still worried about the house. So, really, thank you for taking the burden off them. Thanks for stepping up so the rest of us can, breathe. The air left the room. Taking the burden. She said the quiet part out loud. She admitted it. She knew. I looked at the diamonds around her neck. $10,000 of crystallized carbon. Then I looked at the folder in front of me. $154,000 of toxic debt. They were buying her luxury with my credit score. They were adorning the golden child with jewels while burying the scapegoat in a grave of mold and bankruptcy. And she had the audacity to thank me for it, framing my sacrifice as a duty I owed to her happiness. The injustice of it hit me physically. It felt like a punch to the solar plexus. My blood began to heat up, rushing through my veins with a roar that drowned out the murmurs of the relatives admiring the necklace. Passive-aggressive. That's what this was. It was violence wrapped in a smile. It was a stab in the back delivered with a hug. I looked at my mother. She was watching me, her eyes hard, daring me to ruin the moment. Sign it, her expression said. Sign it and let us win. I looked at my father. He was already pouring more wine, satisfied with his performance, oblivious to the fact that he had just sold his daughter down the river. And then I looked at Rachel in the corner. She wasn't looking at her screen anymore. She was looking at me, her phone held steady, a grim line set on her mouth. She nodded once. I'm rolling. The heat in my blood cooled instantly. It crystallized into something sharp and dangerous. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. and I certainly wasn't going to sign. I gripped the Mont Blanc pen tighter. "You're right, Lila," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. It cut through the room, silencing the oohs and ahs over the diamonds. It is all about fairness and transparency. I stood up. "Elsie, sit down," Mom hissed, her smile faltering. "Just sign the papers." "No," I said. "I don't think I will." I picked up the folder, not to sign it, but to open it. The time for being the polite daughter was over. The time for the soldier was here. "Before we toast," I said, looking directly at my father, "I think everyone needs to see exactly what you're gifting me." I threw the folder onto the center of the table, right into the bowl of mashed potatoes. Gravy splattered onto the pristine white tablecloth like blood. The war had begun. The silence in the dining room was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful silence of a church. It was the vacuum of a bomb site immediately after detonation. The only sound was the wet plop of a single drop of gravy falling from the manila folder onto the pristine white tablecloth. My mother stared at the folder sitting in the bowl of mashed potatoes, her mouth slightly open. The mask of the perfect hostess had cracked, revealing the panic underneath. My father's face was turning a dangerous shade of purple, clashing violently with his sweater vest. "Elsie," Mom said, her voice breathless and high-pitched. "You're tired. You've been in a war zone. You're clearly having an episode. Let's just put the pen away and—" "I'm not having an episode, Mother," I interrupted, my voice calm, measured, and icy. "I'm having a moment of clarity." I reached out and picked up my wine glass. The red liquid swirled against the crystal. I didn't drink. I just held it, looking at my father over the rim. "That Winnebago in the detached garage is beautiful, Dad," I said conversationally. "Truly top of the line." The color drained from Randall's face so fast it looked like gravity had taken hold of his blood. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I tilted my head. "It's a 2024 Winnebago View, $87,000. I saw the bill of sale on the front seat. I just have one question before I leave." I set the glass down with a sharp click. "Does it run on diesel, or does it run on the betrayal of your daughter?" A collective gasp went through the room. Uncle Bob lowered his turkey leg. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. My father sputtered, standing up to regain his dominance. "How dare you snooping around?" he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "We are trying to give you a future, you ungrateful brat. That RV is for our retirement, which we deserve." "You deserve a retirement funded by your own savings, not by my credit score," I shot back. "You have no proof of anything," Mom shrieked, standing up to join him. "She's lying. The stress has gotten to her head." "No proof?" I smiled. It was a wolf smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I didn't look at them. I looked at the massive 70-inch smart TV mounted above the fireplace in the living room, which was currently visible to everyone at the table through the open archway. The Detroit Lions were lining up for a field goal. "Technology is amazing, isn't it?" I said. I swiped down on my control center. Screen mirroring. I selected Cooper Living Room TV. Bloop. The football game vanished. The screen went black for a second, and then, in glorious high definition, a photo appeared. It was the basement wall. "What in God's name is that?" Aunt Linda shrieked. On the screen, the peeled-back beige paint revealed the slick, black necrotic rot of the mold colony underneath. Zoomed in on the big screen, it looked like the surface of an alien planet. It glistened with toxicity. "This," I narrated, pointing my salad fork at the TV like a laser pointer, "is Stachybotrys chartarum. Toxic black mold. Class A biohazard. It causes hemorrhage of the lungs and permanent neurological damage. Mom and Dad painted over it this morning so I wouldn't see it before I signed the deed." "That's a lie," Dad shouted, but his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an escape route. "It's just a little mildew." I swiped left on my phone. The image changed. Now it was the email from Wells Fargo. I zoomed in on the text so even Grandma in the back could read it. Denied. Debt-to-income ratio too high. Appraisal value insufficient. "And this?" I continued, my voice rising just enough to carry over the murmurs of horror. Is the bank telling them that this house is underwater? They owe $154,000 on a house that is rotting from the inside out. They can't refinance. They can't sell it on the open market without disclosing the mold, which would bankrupt them. I swiped again. The bill of sale for the RV appeared. $87,000, dated 3 days ago. So they bought a luxury RV they couldn't afford, I said, turning back to face the table. And they needed a patsy. They needed someone stupid enough or trusting enough to assume the mortgage debt so they could free up their credit to finance their road trip. I looked directly at my mother. She had collapsed back into her chair, looking small and defeated. You weren't giving me a home, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. You were giving me a death sentence. You were going to ruin my security clearance, destroy my military career, and let me live in a poison box just so you could go glamping. The silence that followed was heavy with judgment. The relatives were no longer looking at me. They were looking at Randall and Evelyn with expressions ranging from disbelief to pure disgust. The illusion of the perfect Cooper family had not just cracked, it had shattered into a million jagged pieces. But I wasn't done. I turned my gaze to Lila. She was frozen, her hand clutching the diamond necklace at her throat as if it were suddenly choking her. And you, I said softly. Lila flinched. You knew, I stated. It wasn't a question. Your car is parked right next to that RV in the garage. You were on the phone with Mom when they called me, the insurance plan. Elsie, Lila stammered, her eyes filling with tears. Real tears this time, tears of fear. You sat there, I said, walking slowly around the table toward her. You sat there and thanked me for taking the burden. You accepted a $10,000 diamond necklace bought with money that should have gone to fixing the mold that would have killed me. I stopped right behind her chair. I leaned down, my mouth close to her ear. I hope those diamonds are heavy, Lila, I whispered, because they cost you a sister. Get out! My father slammed his fist onto the table, making the silverware jump. His face was contorted in a mask of rage. He wasn't sorry he did it. He was furious he got caught. You ungrateful, selfish traitor, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. We raised you. We fed you. You owe us. Get out of my house. I stood up straight. I rolled my shoulders back, adopting the posture I had drilled into my muscle memory on the parade grounds of Fort Jackson. I wasn't his daughter in that moment. I was a staff sergeant in the United States Army. No, Dad, I said. I don't owe you a damn thing. I paid for my own prom dress. I paid for my own college with my service. And I almost paid for your retirement with my life. I buttoned my jacket. I looked around the room at the stunned faces of my aunts and uncles. They wouldn't speak up. They were too cowardly. But they knew. The truth was out, and it was ugly. I'm leaving, I said. But let's be clear about one thing. I looked my father dead in the eye. He flinched. I am a soldier, I said, my voice ringing with the finality of a gavel strike. And I do not negotiate with terrorists, even if they share my DNA. If you are cheering for this moment, if you are glad that I finally stood up and refused to be the victim, hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to type, "Justice served," so I know you're standing with me against this madness. Good luck with the bank, I added. I turned on my heel and marched toward the front door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. As I passed the china cabinet, I caught a glimpse of Rachel. She was still leaning against the wall, her phone lowered now. She caught my eye and gave me a slow, deliberate wink. Target destroyed. I walked out into the cold November air. Behind me, the house was erupting into chaos, shouting, crying, accusations. But I didn't hear it. I walked to my rental car, the wind biting at my face, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel cold. I felt lighter. I felt clean. I had lost a house. I had lost a family. But as I unlocked the car door and threw my bag into the passenger seat, I realized what I had gained. I had kept my freedom. And that was worth more than any diamond necklace. The drive to O'Hare International Airport was a blur of white-knuckle tension, but I made my flight with 20 minutes to spare. I sat at the gate in Terminal 3, surrounded by the chaotic hum of holiday travelers. My adrenaline was finally starting to crash, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I stared out the window at the gray tarmac, watching the ground crew load luggage into the belly of a Boeing 737, trying to convince myself that the worst was over. I was wrong. The enemy hadn't surrendered. They had just shifted tactics. My phone buzzed in my hand. It wasn't a notification. It was a rapid-fire series of vibrations that signaled a panicked text thread. I looked down. The name on the screen was Lila. "Daddy is having a heart attack. The ambulance is here. He collapsed right after you left. If he dies, this is on you, Elsie. You killed him." The world stopped. The noise of the terminal, the crying babies, the overhead announcements faded into a dull roar. My heart hammered against my ribs, skipping a beat. For a split second, I wasn't Sergeant Allen. I was a daughter. I saw my father clutching his chest, gasping for air on the dining room floor. A wave of nausea rolled over me. Had I pushed him too far? Was the stress of the confrontation actually lethal? My thumb hovered over the call button. I needed to turn around. I needed to rent a car and speed back to Rockford. I needed to fix this. Stop. The voice in my head was sharp. It was the voice of my drill sergeant from basic training. Panic kills. Assessment saves. I took a deep breath, forcing air into my lungs. I read the text again. "If he dies, this is on you." That phrasing, it was too specific. It was calculated. It was designed to maximize guilt. I lowered my hand. I didn't call Lila. Instead, I opened Safari and typed in Mercy Health Hospital, Rockford, ER. I tapped the number for the main switchboard. "Mercy Health, how can I direct your call?" a pleasant voice answered. "Emergency room, please," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hand. The line clicked over. "ER admission desk." "Hi," I said. "I'm calling to check on a patient's status. My father, Randall Cooper. I was told he was just admitted via ambulance with cardiac arrest." There was a pause, the sound of typing in the background. "One moment, ma'am." The seconds dragged like hours. I watched a family across the aisle sharing a bag of pretzels, looking happy, normal. I wondered if they lied to each other too. "Ma'am," the receptionist came back. "I'm looking at the log for the last 4 hours. We haven't had any ambulance intake for a Randall Cooper. I've checked the waiting room list too. No one by that name." "Are you sure?" I asked, though the cold knot in my stomach was already loosening, replaced by a burning ember of rage. "Maybe he went to Swedish American?" "I can't speak for Swedish, honey, but the paramedics usually route cardiac cases to us from that zip code. If he's not here, he's not here." "Thank you," I said, and hung up. I called Swedish American Hospital just to be thorough. Same result. No Randall Cooper, no ambulance, no heart attack. It was a lie. A hoax. They had weaponized a medical emergency to drag me back. They wanted me to rush into the hospital room, tearful and apologetic, begging for forgiveness so they could leverage my guilt into signing those papers. It was emotional terrorism, plain and simple. I looked at Lila's text again. "You killed him." I didn't reply. I didn't acknowledge it. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb and boarded my plane. As the wheels lifted off the runway, leaving Illinois behind, I realized that the father I thought I had was dead. But he didn't die of a heart attack. He died the moment he decided to fake one to manipulate me. By the time I landed back at Fayetteville Regional and took a cab to my off-base apartment near Fort Liberty, it was late. My phone, now reconnected to the network, started pinging again. But this time, it wasn't texts. It was Facebook notifications. "Aunt Linda mentioned you in a comment." Uncle Bob reacted to a post you're tagged in. Stranger commented, "You should be ashamed of yourself." My stomach dropped. I sat on my couch, tossed my duffel bag on the floor, and opened the app. There it was. A post from Evelyn Cooper, posted 2 hours ago. It was a photo of her and me from my boot camp graduation years ago. We were hugging. She looked like the proud mother. The caption, however, was a masterpiece of fiction. "My heart is shattered tonight. As many of you know, my daughter Elsie came home for Thanksgiving. We were so excited to gift her the family home, a legacy for her future. But the war has changed her. She had a severe PTSD episode at dinner. She started hallucinating, screaming about mold that wasn't there, accusing her loving family of terrible things. She was paranoid and aggressive. It was terrifying. The army has broken my sweet girl. She stormed out and left her poor father with chest pains from the shock. Please, prayer warriors, lift Elsie up. She is not herself. We forgive her, but we are so worried about her mental state. The post already had 245 likes and 80 comments. Oh, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. PTSD is a monster. Thank you for your service, but she sounds dangerous. How could she treat you like that after you offered her a house? Ungrateful. Sending prayers for Randall. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with red. She wasn't just lying. She was stealing my narrative. She was using stolen valor in reverse, weaponizing my service against me. She was painting me as the crazy veteran, the unstable soldier who couldn't distinguish reality from a hallucination. She was using a serious medical condition, PTSD, as a shield to cover up her fraud. If this got back to my chain of command, if someone reported that I was hallucinating and aggressive, I could be pulled for a psych evaluation. My security clearance could be flagged. She wasn't just ruining my reputation in the family. She was endangering my career again, this time publicly. My thumb hovered over the comment button. I wanted to scream. I wanted to type in all caps. I wanted to defend myself. Don't, I told myself. Never wrestle with a pig. You both get dirty and the pig likes it. I needed a sniper, not a brawler. I took a screenshot of the post. I opened my encrypted messaging app and sent it to Rachel. Elsie. Status report. Have you seen this? Rachel. Seen it? I'm currently holding back vomit. She's deleting any comment that questions her story. Elsie. I'm authorizing the nuclear option. Release the package. Rachel. Copy that. Fire in the hole. I put the phone down on the coffee table and waited. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the adrenaline dump. 3 minutes later, my phone buzzed. I picked it up and refreshed the Facebook post. There, right at the top, was a new comment from Rachel Cooper. Aunt Evelyn, this is an interesting creative writing exercise, but since we're talking about facts, let's look at the receipts. You say Elsie was hallucinating? Here's the video of the Class A toxic black mold you painted over in the basement this morning. Video attached. You say you were gifting her a home? Here's the email from Wells Fargo denying your refinance because the house is $154,000 underwater. Image attached. You say Elsie is ungrateful. Here's the bill of sale for the $87,000 Winnebago you bought 3 days ago, proving you needed her to assume your debt so you could keep your toy. Image attached. Stop using PTSD as a cover for mortgage fraud. The internet is forever, and so is the law. I refreshed the page again. The reactions were instantaneous. The likes on Rachel's comment skyrocketed. Wait, is that real mold? Holy shit, Evelyn. Receipts. Damn! The tide turned instantly. The sympathy for the suffering mother evaporated, replaced by the collective shock of the audience seeing the truth. Rachel hadn't just defended me. She had nuked the entire narrative. I watched the screen, waiting for Evelyn's reply. But there was no reply. 10 minutes later, a message popped up. This content is no longer available. Evelyn had deleted the post. She had deleted the evidence of her own humiliation. She couldn't control the narrative anymore, so she burned the library. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. How could you let Rachel do that? You are ruining this family. Take it down. Then a text from Dad. I have no daughter. Then a text from Lila. You're a bitch. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel sad. I felt lighter. The illusion was gone. The cord was cut. I went into my contacts. Evelyn Cooper. Block caller. Randall Cooper, block caller. Lila Cooper, block caller. I went to Facebook. Blocked. Instagram, blocked. Silence descended on my digital life. The radio silence was absolute. I sat back on my couch in the quiet of my apartment. It was a lonely silence, yes. I was an orphan now, in every way that mattered. But it was a safe silence. No more gaslighting, no more manipulation, no more walking on eggshells waiting for the next explosion. I picked up my phone one last time and texted Rachel. Elsie. Target neutralized. Good shooting, Tex. Rachel. Anytime, Sarge. Get some sleep. The trash took itself out. I closed my eyes, finally letting the tension drain from my shoulders. The guerrilla war was over. I had won the skirmish. But as any soldier knows, winning the battle doesn't mean the war is finished. I knew my parents. They were cornered animals now. Their reputation was shredded, their finances were imploding, and their insurance plan had just walked away. They wouldn't just give up. They would lawyer up. And sure enough, 2 days later, the real war began. But this time, I wouldn't be fighting with Facebook comments. I would be fighting with the full force of the United States military legal system behind me. I fell asleep on the couch, the phone resting on my chest, dreaming not of monsters, but of clear skies and open roads. I was ready for whatever came next. The ceasefire lasted exactly 1 week. I was back at Fort Liberty, settling into the rhythm of base life. PT at 0600, motor pool inspections at 0900, and the comforting regimented order of military existence. I thought the enemy had retreated to lick their wounds. I thought the sheer humiliation of the Thanksgiving dinner and the subsequent Facebook massacre would keep them quiet for a long time. But I underestimated the audacity of a narcissist backed into a corner. It was Tuesday morning when my phone pinged with an email notification. The subject line was flagged in red: Urgent, Pre-Litigation Settlement Demand. It was from a sender I didn't recognize, the law offices of Stephen J. Katz. I sat down at my desk, sipping my lukewarm coffee, and opened it. Dear Ms. Allen, this firm represents Ms. Lila Cooper in the matter of the defamatory statements published by you and your associates on the social media platform Facebook on November 23rd. Your malicious publication of private financial documents and false allegations regarding the condition of the property have caused my client severe emotional distress, reputational damage, and loss of standing in the community. We are prepared to file a civil suit for defamation of character and intentional infliction of emotional distress. However, Ms. Cooper is willing to settle this matter out of court for a payment of $50,000 and a public written apology. You have 48 hours to respond before we proceed with litigation. I read it twice. Then I laughed. A loud, dry bark of laughter that made the corporal at the desk next to me jump. Lila wasn't just delusional. She was legally suicidal. She thought she could scare me. She thought lawyer was a magic word that would make the bad soldier sister open her checkbook. She forgot that I didn't answer to civilian scare tactics anymore. I answered to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and I had resources she couldn't even dream of. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the email, grabbed my cover, and walked straight across the base to the Legal Assistance Office. In the military, we have the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG. They are the lawyers who handle everything from rules of engagement in war zones to prosecuting court-martials. But they also provide legal aid to soldiers for civil matters, and they are very, very good at destroying bullies. I had an appointment with Captain Miller, a JAG officer I'd worked with once before on a lease dispute. He was a sharp man with a buzz cut and eyes that looked like they had seen every lie a human being could tell. I sat down in his office, the American flag standing stiffly in the corner, and slid the letter across his desk. My sister is trying to sue me for $50,000 because I proved our parents tried to defraud me, I said. Captain Miller picked up the paper. He read it, his eyebrows climbing higher with every paragraph. By the time he finished, he was shaking his head. Stephen J. Katz, Miller muttered. I know this guy. He's a strip mall ambulance chaser. He mostly handles slip-and-fall cases at Walmart. He's trying to shake you down. Can they win? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Defamation requires a false statement, Miller said, leaning back in his chair. Did you lie about the mold? No, sir. I have video evidence and a lab test pending. Did you lie about the RV or the mortgage? I have the bank email and the bill of sale. Then truth is an absolute defense, Miller said, tossing the letter onto the desk like it was trash. But here's the fun part, Sergeant Allen. By sending this letter, they've just opened themselves up to a world of hurt. They are demanding money to keep quiet about a crime they committed. That pushes the line toward extortion. He pulled his keyboard closer. Do you want to make this go away, or do you want to nuke it from orbit? I thought about Lila's smirk when she touched her diamond necklace. I thought about my father screaming at me to get out. I thought about the black mold waiting in the basement to eat my lungs. Nuke it, I said. I want them to be afraid to even type my name. Roger that, Miller grinned. It was a shark's grin. Let's draft a response. The letter Captain Miller composed was a work of art. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It was cold, hard, legal steel. It started by rejecting the demand for $50,000 as baseless. But then, it dropped the hammer. Please be advised, the letter read, that my client possesses irrefutable documentary evidence that your clients, Randall and Evelyn Cooper, engaged in mortgage fraud under 18 U.S. Code per Standard 14 by attempting to transfer a property with undisclosed material defects, toxic mold, and negative equity to a third party under false pretenses. Furthermore, the purchase of the Winnebago RV, $87,000, while claiming financial insolvency to the bank, raises significant questions regarding the source of funds. We are prepared to file a formal report with the FBI regarding the mortgage fraud attempt. Additionally, we will be forwarding all financial documents, including the undeclared assets used for the RV purchase, to the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, Criminal Investigation Division for an audit of the Coopers' tax filings. If your client proceeds with this lawsuit, we will countersue for abuse of process and extortion. We await your confirmation that this matter is closed with prejudice. Miller hit print. He handed it to me to sign. The FBI and the IRS, I said, reading the names of the two scariest organizations in America. Is that overkill? For a family that tried to ruin your military career and health? Miller looked me in the eye. No, it's close air support. Send it. I faxed the letter to Mr. Katz's office that afternoon. The response came 48 hours later. It wasn't an email. It was a phone call to Captain Miller's office. I was sitting there when the call came in. Miller put it on speaker. Captain Miller, a sweaty, nervous voice came through the line. It was Katz. I received your correspondence regarding the Cooper matter. Go ahead, Mr. Katz, Miller said, his voice devoid of warmth. Yes, well, after reviewing the additional context provided by your client, I have advised Miss Cooper that litigation is not in her best interest at this time. We are withdrawing the demand. We are closing the file. Smart move, Miller said. And the parents? I no longer represent the parents, Katz said quickly, sounding like he wanted to distance himself from a radioactive isotope. In fact, I am advising them to seek criminal defense counsel if what you say about the FBI is true. Please don't file those reports yet. They are elderly people. That's up to Sergeant Allen, Miller said, looking at me. I leaned toward the phone. Mr. Katz, this is Sergeant Allen. Yes. Hello? Tell them to never contact me again, I said. Tell them if I see one more text, one more Facebook post, or one more letter, I press send on the email to the IRS. Do you understand? Loud and clear, Sergeant. Loud and clear. The line went dead. Captain Miller fist-bumped me across the desk. Target destroyed. I walked out of the JAG office into the bright North Carolina sunlight. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized was there. The threat of the lawsuit was gone. Lila's attempt to squeeze money out of me had backfired, leaving them terrified of federal prison. But while I had won the legal battle, the war of reality was just hitting my parents back in Rockford. I didn't see it with my own eyes, but Rachel filled me in later. And honestly, the mental image was enough. Without me to act as their financial life raft, the dam broke. Wells Fargo didn't care about their sob stories or their legacy. When the refinance was denied and the mortgage payments were missed, because they had spent their liquidity on the RV down payment and the diamonds, the bank initiated the foreclosure process. A week later, a foreclosure sign was planted in the manicured front lawn of the house on Elm Street. It stood there like a tombstone for their reputation. The neighbors, the ones Dad loved to impress, slowed their cars down to look. The whispers started. The shame they had tried to avoid by using me had found them anyway. But the coup de grace happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The dealership that sold them the Winnebago realized the financing had fallen through. My parents had likely lied on the credit application, banking on the house transfer to clear their debt-to-income ratio. When that didn't happen, the loan was recalled. Rachel told me she drove by just as the tow truck arrived. It wasn't a discreet operation. It was a massive, diesel-chugging wrecker with flashing amber lights. The repo man, a guy who looked like he had zero patience for suburban drama, hooked up the gleaming $87,000 RV right in the driveway. Dad apparently came running out of the house in his bathrobe, screaming, waving his arms. He tried to block the truck. He threatened to sue. He yelled about his rights. The repo man just ignored him, locked the chains, and dragged the symbol of their retirement dreams down the street. Lila's BMW never happened. In fact, Rachel told me Lila was seen taking the bus to the mall because she had totaled her car and the new car money was gone. The diamonds? Probably at a pawn shop by now to pay for a bankruptcy lawyer. I stood on my balcony that night, looking up at the stars. I thought about the toxic mold growing in the basement, spreading its black tendrils in the dark. It was a perfect metaphor for my family. They had let the rot grow beneath the surface for years, covering it up with fresh paint and fake smiles. Now, the paint was peeled back. The structure was condemned. And I was the only one who made it out before the roof collapsed. Justice isn't always a gavel banging in a courtroom. Sometimes justice is just watching the consequences of someone's own actions finally catch up to them. And let me tell you, from where I was standing, it was a beautiful sight. 6 months had passed since the Thanksgiving dinner that ended with a folder in the mashed potatoes and a family shattered into pieces. It was May in North Carolina. The dogwood trees on base were in full bloom, their white petals drifting like snow across the parade grounds. I sat on the balcony of my apartment, cleaning my M4 carbine. The rhythmic motion of disassembling the bolt carrier group was meditative. It was something I could control. My phone buzzed on the patio table. It was Rachel. We had a standing appointment, a bi-weekly debrief she called the Intel Report. I picked up, putting the speaker on. Status report, I said, wiping oil from my fingers. You might want to sit down for this one, Sarge. Rachel's voice crackled through the line. She sounded tired, but there was a grim satisfaction in her tone. The bank auction was yesterday. I paused, the cleaning rag hovering over the firing pin. And sold, Rachel said, to a flipper from Chicago. They got it for pennies on the dollar because of the mold disclosure. The bank took a loss, which means they are definitely going after your dad for the deficiency judgment. Where are they? I asked. I expected to feel a surge of victory, but I didn't. I just felt a dull ache in my chest. They're out, Rachel said. The sheriff came to enforce the eviction notice on Tuesday. It was ugly, Elsie. Dad was screaming about his rights. Mom was crying about her antique china. They're in a rental now. A 2-bedroom apartment over on the south side, near the old textile plant. I knew the area. It was a neighborhood of cracked pavement, chain-link fences, and the constant pervasive smell of industrial exhaust. It was the kind of place Randall Cooper had spent his entire life looking down on. It's bad, Rachel continued, her voice lowering. Dad sits in his recliner, the only piece of nice furniture that fit, and just stares at the wall. He blames Mom for pampering you too much. Mom blames Dad for the bad investment. They scream at each other until the neighbors bang on the ceiling. And Lila? I asked. Rachel let out a short, sharp laugh. That's the best part. With the credit lines frozen and the parents tapping out their Social Security just to pay rent, the bank of Mom and Dad is officially bankrupt. Lila had to get a job. Lila, working? The concept was almost foreign. She's waiting tables at that diner off the interstate, the one with the sticky menus, Rachel said. I went in there just to see it with my own eyes. She was wearing a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too big, wiping ketchup off a table while a trucker yelled at her for cold coffee. She looked miserable. She looked real. I closed my eyes, picturing it. The golden child, who had totaled a car because it wasn't luxurious enough, was now hustling for tips to buy gas. Karma hadn't just knocked on their door, it had kicked it down. "Thanks for the update, Rach," I said quietly. "You okay?" she asked. "You don't sound happy. You should be happy. They got what they deserved." "I know," I said. "I'll talk to you later." I hung up and looked out at the tree line. Rachel was right. It was justice. But as I sat there in the quiet spring evening, I didn't feel the rush of triumph I had felt when I walked out of their house in November. I felt hollow. It was a strange, heavy grief. I wasn't mourning the loss of the house. I wasn't mourning their financial ruin. I was mourning the death of the people I thought they were. I realized then that I was an orphan. My parents were still breathing, still fighting in a shabby apartment 500 miles away. But to me, they were gone. The father who was supposed to protect me, the mother who was supposed to nurture me, they had never really existed. They were characters played by two selfish people who had finally forgotten their lines. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence of the apartment felt oppressive. I needed to get it out. I needed to excise the last bit of poison they had left in my blood. I got up and went to the kitchen. I grabbed a yellow legal pad and a pen. I sat at the counter, the only light coming from the street lamps outside. I started to write. "Dear Mom and Dad, I remember the day I graduated from basic training. I looked for you in the stands for 2 hours. You said the flight was too expensive, but the next week you bought a new patio set. I remember the prom dress. I remember the mold. I remember looking at you across that table at Thanksgiving and waiting for you to say, 'Just kidding.' Waiting for you to say, 'We love you more than a Winnebago.' But you didn't. You chose a vehicle over your daughter. You chose appearances over my health. And now, you have neither." I wrote for an hour. I poured every ounce of resentment, every childhood slight, every moment of neglect onto the yellow paper. I wrote about the fear of the debt. I wrote about the humiliation of being the insurance plan. When I was done, I had 5 pages of dense, angry script. It was a manifesto of my pain. I folded the pages, I picked up an envelope, and then I stopped. If I mailed this, what would happen? They would read it. They would get defensive. They would call me ungrateful. They would use it as ammunition to tell the neighbors how cruel I was. Sending it was an invitation for a response, and I didn't want a response. I didn't want a dialogue. Closure isn't something you get from other people. It's something you give yourself. I walked over to the stainless steel kitchen sink. I placed the sheaf of papers in the basin. I struck a match. The yellow paper caught quickly. The flame curled the edges, turning my angry words into black carbon. I watched the fire consume the prom dress, eat the Winnebago, and turn the black mold into gray ash. The smoke rose, thin and wispy, disappearing into the vent hood. I watched until the last ember died out. All that was left was a pile of fragile, dark ash in the bottom of the sink. I turned on the faucet. The water rushed out, swirling the ash down the drain. Gone. I took a deep breath. The air in the kitchen felt lighter. The heavy weight that had been sitting on my chest for 6 months washed away with the ink and the ash. I forgave them. Not because they deserved it. They didn't. I forgave them because I refused to carry the backpack of rocks they had strapped to me. I was putting it down. I was walking away, light and free. 2 days later, I stood in formation on the company parade field. The sun was bright, reflecting off the polished boots of 200 soldiers. "Attention to orders," the first sergeant bellowed. I stepped forward, marching with a snap in my step that echoed off the asphalt. "To all who shall see these presents, greeting," the commander read. "Know ye that reposing special trust and confidence in the fidelity and abilities of Sergeant Elsie Allen, I do hereby promote her to the rank of Staff Sergeant." The commander stepped up and ripped the Velcro patch from my chest, replacing it with the new rank. 3 chevrons up, 1 rocker down, E6. It was a significant promotion. It meant more pay, yes, but it meant I was now a senior non-commissioned officer. I was a leader. I had earned this. Not by being someone's favorite, not by manipulating anyone, but by showing up, doing the work, and surviving. Speech, someone yelled from the ranks. I turned to face my platoon. These were the people who checked on me when I was sick. These were the people who had my back in the field. Thanks for the trust, I said, my voice projecting clearly. Drinks are on me tonight. A cheer went up. That evening, after the celebration, I sat in front of my laptop. I opened my banking app. The savings account I had labeled Mom's House Fix was still there. It had $12,000 in it, money I had scraped together from combat pay, hoping to surprise them with a new roof or a kitchen remodel. For months, looking at that number had made me feel guilty. Now, looking at it just felt like opportunity. I opened a new tab, Expedia. I had always wanted to go to Iceland. I wanted to see the glaciers. I wanted to see the land of fire and ice. But mostly, I wanted to see the aurora borealis. I wanted to stand under a sky that was burning with color and feel small in the best possible way. My cursor hovered over the Book Now button. The old Elsie, the scapegoat, would have hesitated. She would have thought, is this selfish? Should I save this in case they need help? What if Lila needs rent money? Staff Sergeant Allen didn't hesitate. I wasn't saving them anymore. I was investing in the only asset that had never let me down, myself. I clicked, confirm. Your trip to Reykjavik is booked. A smile spread across my face, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I closed the laptop. The house on Elm Street was gone. The family I thought I had was gone. But as I looked around my quiet, clean apartment, I realized I wasn't empty. I was just cleared out. I had made space. Space for new memories. Space for people who actually respected me. Space for a life that was entirely, unapologetically mine. The ashes had washed down the drain. It was time for the phoenix to fly. Before I boarded the plane that would take me 4,000 miles away from the wreckage of my past, I agreed to one final meeting. I told myself it wasn't for closure. I had already found that in the ashes in my kitchen sink. It was a perimeter check. I needed to verify that the threat was neutralized before I left the area of operations. We met at a Starbucks near the airport. It was raining, a gray, miserable drizzle that slicked the pavement and made the world look washed out. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a black coffee, watching the door. When Lila walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the pristine, polished, golden child who used to sneer at my combat boots. The girl standing in the doorway looked frayed. Her hair, usually blown out to perfection, was pulled back in a messy, greasy bun. She was wearing sweatpants that had seen better days and a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big. But it was her eyes that shocked me. They were darting around the room, anxious, fearful. She spotted me and rushed over, sliding into the booth opposite me. She smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap vanilla body spray. A desperate attempt to cover up the scent of failure. "Elsie," she breathed, reaching across the table as if to take my hand. I pulled back, wrapping my fingers around my warm mug. "Lila," I said. My voice was neutral, professional. "I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't think you would. Mom and Dad, they're impossible right now." "You heard about the eviction?" "I heard." "It's a nightmare," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sleeping on a pull-out couch in their living room. Dad yells at the TV all day. Mom just cries. And the diner. Elsie, it's horrible. My feet bleed every night. I get tipped in quarters." She paused, waiting for me to offer sympathy. When I remained silent, she leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a desperate whisper. "I need help, Elsie. Just a little bit. I found a studio apartment near the mall. It's tiny, but it's mine. I just need the first month's rent and the security deposit. $1,200. That's it. If you can loan me that, I can get out of there. I can pay you back when things pick up." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had accepted a diamond necklace while I was being served a death sentence. I looked at the girl who had totaled a car because it wasn't fancy enough. who was now begging for the price of a used iPhone. Part of me, the old Elsie, the sister who wanted to be loved, felt a twinge of pity. It would be so easy to write the check. I had the money. It would make the guilt go away. But then I remembered the mold. I remembered the insurance plan. I reached into my pocket. Lila's eyes lit up. She thought I was reaching for my checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a small white rectangular card. I slid it across the table. Lila looked at it, confused. "What is this?" "It's a business card for Adecco Staffing," I said. "They have an office on Main Street. They're recruiting for warehouse positions. It pays $18 an hour, plus overtime. It's hard work, but it pays weekly." Lila stared at the card as if it were a dead insect. Her face crumpled, twisting from hope into ugly, entitled anger. "You're kidding," she spat. "A warehouse? You want me to lift boxes? I'm asking for a loan, Elsie. We're family." "We share DNA, Lila. That's not the same thing," I said, standing up. I fished a $5 bill out of my pocket and placed it on the table next to her untouched latte. "Coffee is on me. That is the only financial assistance you will ever receive from me again." "You can't leave me like this," she shrieked, drawing the attention of the other customers. "I can't do this alone." I looked down at her, and for the first time, I didn't see a monster. I just saw a child who had never been taught how to walk, angry that no one would carry her anymore. "You have 2 legs, Lila," I said softly. "Stand on them." I turned and walked out into the rain. I didn't look back. I hailed a cab, threw my bag in the trunk, and told the driver to take me to the international terminal. 48 hours later, the world had changed color. I was standing in the middle of Thingvellir National Park in Iceland. It was midnight, but the sky wasn't dark. It was a deep, bruised purple, alive with stars that looked sharp enough to cut glass. The air here was different. It didn't smell like wet pavement or industrial exhaust or vanilla candles masking toxic rot. It smelled of ice. It smelled of ancient moss and volcanic rock. It was the cleanest thing I had ever breathed. I adjusted the collar of my thermal parka, my breath puffing out in white clouds before me. It was freezing, a bone-deep cold that should have been uncomfortable, but instead felt invigorating. It woke up every nerve ending in my body. I was alone. No squad, no parents, no mission. Just me and the vast, indifferent silence of the North. I had spent the day hiking along the tectonic plates, standing on the bridge between North America and Europe. I had seen waterfalls that roared like jet engines and glaciers that glowed blue. I had realized how small I was and how small my problems were in the face of geology. And then, it started. A ribbon of pale green light unfurled across the horizon. It started slow, a shy dancer stepping onto the stage. Then, it exploded. The sky caught fire with color. Green, violet, and pink curtains of light shimmered and danced overhead, moving with a silent, ghostly rhythm. The aurora borealis. I tilted my head back, watching the spectacle, tears freezing on my cheeks. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from the sheer, overwhelming beauty of it. For 29 years, I had lived in the gray. I had lived in the shadow of my family's expectations, in the dark corners of their neglect. I had let them define my worth. I had let them convince me that I was only good for what I could provide. But standing here, under this cathedral of light, I realized they were wrong. I wasn't an insurance plan. I wasn't a scapegoat. I was this. I was alive. I was free. My phone buzzed in the deep pocket of my coat, startling me. I hesitated. I had almost forgotten I brought it. I pulled it out, half expecting a nasty text from Lila or a guilt trip from my mother. But the screen was lit up with a message from Rachel. "Happy birthday, Staff Sergeant. Check your email. My birthday." I had completely forgotten. In the chaos of the trip, I didn't even realize today was the day. I opened my email app with clumsy, gloved fingers. There was a video file attached. I clicked play. The screen filled with a shaky, low-light video. It was filmed inside the team room back at Fort Liberty. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. The camera panned out to reveal my entire squad: Corporal Mendez, Specialist Davis, Private Johnson, even the gruff platoon sergeant. They were holding up red Solo cups, wearing party hats that looked ridiculous with their uniforms. "Happy birthday to you! Happy birthday to you!" They sang loudly, horribly off-key, laughing and shoving each other. "We miss you, Sarge," Mendez yelled into the camera. "Hurry back, the new guy doesn't know how to navigate." "Drink a beer for us in Iceland," Davis shouted. Then the camera flipped around, and Rachel's face filled the frame. She was smiling, her nose ring glinting. "Happy birthday, Elsie," she said softly. "You did it, you're free, we love you. Now put the phone away and look at the sky." The video ended. I stood there in the snow, clutching the phone to my chest, laughing through my tears. I had spent my whole life chasing the love of people who shared my blood, begging for a seat at a table where I was only served scraps. I thought that if I lost them, I would have nothing. But I was wrong. I looked at the frozen landscape around me, illuminated by the celestial fire. I thought about Rachel, who risked her relationship with the family to help me. I thought about my soldiers, who respected me not for what I could buy them, but for who I was. That was my family. The family I chose. The family that chose me back. I put the phone away. I didn't need to record this moment. I wanted to feel it. I looked up at the dancing lights, and for a moment, I imagined my parents sitting in their cramped apartment, bitter and angry, watching daytime television. I imagined Lila wiping tables, angry at the world. I didn't feel hate anymore. I didn't feel the need for revenge. They were trapped in a prison of their own making, a prison built of greed and superficiality. I was out. I took a deep breath of the Arctic air, filling my lungs until they burned pleasantly. There is a Mexican proverb that says, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." My family tried to bury me. They tried to bury me under debt, under guilt, under toxic mold and lies. They thought the weight of their expectations would crush me. They thought I would rot in the dark, just like that basement wall. But they forgot what happens when you put a seed in the dark and pile dirt on top of it. You don't kill it. You give it exactly what it needs to grow. I pushed through the dirt, I broke through the surface, and now I was standing in the light. I looked directly into the lens of my own life, speaking to the version of me that used to be scared and to anyone else out there who felt buried. "They can take your money," I whispered to the wind. "They can take your house. They can even take your past, but they can never take your future. That belongs to you." The aurora flared one last time, a brilliant streak of violet cutting across the night, pointing the way north, pointing the way forward. I adjusted my pack, turned my back on the darkness, and started walking. The night was cold, but I had never felt so warm. Thank you for listening to my story. If Elsie's journey from a scapegoat to a survivor inspired you, please hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you are not defined by the people who broke you. You are defined by how you rebuild. Subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Until next time, stay strong.